How incredible was the Nance? Oh, yes. Right? Thank you, that's it. Well, you have just seen tonight's guest give one of the finest performances of his illustrious career. So please welcome one of this generation's greatest actors who works effortlessly between stage, screen, and television, two-time Tony Award winner, Nathan Lane.
Thank you.
Yep, right? Good evening.
Good evening, nice to see you.
Your brilliant performance as Chauncey Miles is the perfect melding of artist and material. Would you all agree? Nathan, how did the Nance originally come about for you?
Douglas Carter Beane, who was a writer I knew, and we had almost done one other show together. He had asked me to do something, and I couldn't do it. And then he sent me the play by email. He said, I think this is something special. And I thought of you after I finished it. So I read it and thought, well, that's a really interesting piece. It's so theatrical and ambitious, and he's juggling a lot of interesting stories, the sort of gay life in the 30s, and the social politics, the New York history, and those politics, and I was sort of fascinated by the character and this sort of, for lack of a better word, cabaret-like structure of the onstage life and the offstage life, and so I said, well, sure, I'm game if you want to do this, you know, where should we do it? And I suggested, you know, I think this would be better served in an institutional, and I mean that in the nicest way, in an institutional theater, a Lincoln Center, a Roundabout, somewhere that, you know, it wasn't a big commercial production. And so we both had a relationship with the Lincoln Center, and he was about to meet with Andre Bishop to have lunch to discuss future projects, and so he brought this up, and that was sort of the beginning of it. We over a period, I think, of about 3 years, we eventually Jack O'Brien was enlisted into this project, and we had readings. We you know, did a couple of workshops, and then we're just trying to figure out the scheduling of it, and then and as the time went on, we would, you know, after each workshop or reading, we would say how we felt, what the play needed, if this was clear, if the relationship between Ned and Chauncey, and that it needed more development, was a scene missing. There was also some cutting of, there was a sketch, and I really wanted to do it. He had a burlesque sketch they did of, it was Uncle Tom's Cabin. and I was playing Simon Legree, but he was called Swishy Legree. But it meant that the actor playing Ephraim would have had to have been in blackface, and we did it when we did. Sometimes we did these readings for a lot of the Lincoln Center staff, and they would sit, and you know, and some, I guess some of the people were uncomfortable with the nature of I don't know, the extreme effeminacy of the character, although it seems like that character has been with us for a very long time, but in one form or another. But you know, it was always interesting to do the play, and you know, and people didn't react to that kind of hi, simply hi, and there was dead silence. It was uncomfortable, and then finally Andre said, we can't possibly do that. Uncle Tom's Cabin. Everything. We did it. We did it in a reading, and everything came to a grinding halt. People were openly weeping, you know. And even the notion of a man in blackface or me with a little whip hitting people. And, so, really, look, even you're shocked. Anyway, it went through, you know, many manifestations. And then the last one, we were also kind of thinking about who would play Ned. And then we did the last one, and we thought, there was a conjecture about how the play should end. Should it end? There's so much to tell you, but there was a thought of maybe ending on the Hortense monologue, and you know, it's interesting, when we finally went into rehearsal and it was all cast and we were going to do it on Broadway for Lincoln Center, we would do that. I remember doing that piece, that part of the play, and it just seemed like jokes. I mean, it's a very classic, very old character from burlesque. Mickey Rooney did it in Sugar Babies. He came out in drag, and he was called Hortense. He was an old whore who lived down by the river, and would just talk about her sad life and do a lot of double entendre jokes, and that you know, and it's funny, and it's sort of a classic character. And it was interesting. In rehearsal one day, we were doing sort of a run-through, and you know, Doug, there were just all these jokes, but in the middle there was the rhyming names of her boyfriends. There was Fred, there was somebody else, and then Ned, and all it said in the script was, "This stops him for a minute." And so I would say to Jack, well, what should we do? How should we deal with this? I mean, is he just carrying on in a professional way? It takes him by surprise, and then he goes on. And then this one day we were having a run through, not in costume or anything, but we were going through it, and it was sort of a relentless play for me, and because you went from one thing to the other, and quite extreme, silly, broad burlesque sketches, and then something very heavy and serious, and then we got to this thing, and I said, Ned, and I just broke into tears. It was just, I don't know, it was maybe also the kind of the brutality of the scene beforehand, where he just wants him out of his life because he just can't do it. And it just hit me. And and then we finished, and Jack came up to me and he said, well, I think that's really what it's about. Ultimately, and then he has to sort of carry on. And then it was interesting that what surprised me was in performance, I just thought people would see me in drag and laugh. But the people were so upset on his behalf, knowing that he was uncomfortable having to do drag, and yet he needs to perform, and there he is. And it was interesting, because I would start it, and you want a shift in tone anyway. That number the ladies did, which was fantastic and kind of shocking in its way, and angry. And then him coming out leaning against the lamppost smoking, and I just thought they would laugh, and then it was an interesting transition in how they would start to slowly laugh at those hoary old jokes, and then be taken by surprise. And then it was really sort of an improvisation in performance. I broke down, and I saw the actor, Jeff, who was playing the stage. He was the stage manager, and he didn't have any lines, but he would stand in the wings and watch me. This was so sweet, and why you love actors is he would stand in the wings and watch me. And when I would break down, I looked at him, and I would see him and he couldn't be seen by the audience, but he would be telling me to go on, keep going. Keep doing it, and that's why what led me to say, I was saying to him, I can't do this. I just, and he would say, go on, do the, and it was sort of, he was being supportive and also sort of angry because we're putting on a fucking show and go finish the fucking thing. And it was sort of horrifying, and yet I loved that he was there. He was being there for me as an actor. And that's sort of how that all developed. And then as it went on, there were little bits when he reads the thing, the little poem he wrote. And there's what he says, it all sort of starts to hit him because it's all applying to how he's treated Ned. And it was a fascinating thing to figure out, literally in front of audiences every night. So we thought maybe it should end there, maybe with a maybe slightly different, a little rewrite, and that may be how it should end. And then we talked about it and felt that you feel like you want to tie up the other stories and what happens to the other characters. But it was, obviously, what else do you want to know? But it was such a great, a terrific, brilliant company of actors, and everyone, it was a wonderful piece to work on. We were Jack O'Brien and I and Doug. Doug is a great collaborator. He's so quick, and he can rewrite quickly, and he'll try things, and if something doesn't work, he's the first one to say, let's get rid of that. And I was just so proud of him because, people know him. He's one of the wittiest writers, along with Paul Rudnick, one of the wittiest writers I know for the theater. And here he was trying this. The play came about because he was, at the same time, he was preparing to go off to some retreat, a writer's retreat, to work on a new project or something, whatever was he didn't really have an idea, but he was reading this book called Gay New York by George Chauncey, which covers gay life in New York from 1890 to 1940. And it's for anyone, but especially for gay people, and especially young gay people, should definitely read this book. It's unbelievable, the information. It's fascinating. And so he had been reading this book and also trying to put together a benefit for this group that he ran, the drama department. And they were just going to do, for fun, they were going to do old burlesque sketches. So he had been reading in this archival material he found. Every once in a while he saw a Nance enters, a couple of times. And he was sort of like, he sort of got the idea of what it was, but I was sort of repelled and also curious. What is a Nance? He knew the term Nancy, the British term Nancy boy, but and then there was also a reference to it in the George Chauncey book that actually in the Astor Place Theater they had in the balcony what they referred to as a Nance element that was people considered unsavory, and so he started to put all of this together, and he went off to this retreat and sat down and wrote the first scene. And using the name, because of the writer, George Chauncey, he called him Chauncey. And that's sort of how the play started. Okay, now you talk.
No, I talk. You've answered all my questions. No.
Did I?
Jack O'Brien is one of the most brilliant directors. What is he like working as a director, and what makes him such a great director?
Well, Jack he's theatrical. He's full of joy and love. He loves the actors. He creates this wonderful atmosphere, this playground where you feel free to try anything and fail. And he's so eloquent, articulate. He just, he gives the greatest, most inspirational speeches before every rehearsal, let alone when you're in performance. And he has such a sense of, you should read his book, Jack Be Nimble. It's, the whole regional theater movement, which he was a huge part of, along with Ellis Rabb and Bill Ball. But it's really about his relationship with Ellis Rabb and his work in regional theaters and the classical repertory. It's a great read. It's really witty and it's like having dinner with Jack. But he has such a sense of the history of the theater. In fact, that's one of the great things about reading the book is his description. For example, he describes seeing Rosemary Harris for the first time in, I don't know whether it was a Moliere play or a restoration play, but he describes it, and it's almost like someone put on a video of Rosemary Harris and seeing her in her youth playing this part and the extraordinary things she did with it, and with dealing with the language and whatever piece of business she had to do, and so he's just a great cheerleader, coach, and just such a smart man. And we had known each other for years, and had almost worked together on another project that didn't work out, and so it felt like this was really the right piece for us to do together, and especially at Lincoln Center, and so he's just someone you want to have in your corner, and he's the first one to say, you know what, I'm not sure what we should do with this, but let's figure it out together. And so he's, it's a joyous experience working with him. Although you also feel someone is in control. Someone is, he's a good daddy. He knows. Yeah. He's in charge, and yet you feel total freedom, and he was just he had a great feel for this particular play and that time period.
See, I love that the three of you worked on this together, because I'm sure Doug started out more of a fun type of play, and then during the course of working on it with the three of you, you pushed him as a playwright too, right?
It was always dark.
Okay.
I mean, there was an ending to the play that was so dark. I said, Doug, we can't do that. It's too weird and surreal, and it was tempting because it was so dark. Because I like dark.
Yeah.
It's funny, the ending to this play. People read far too much into it. I would read things that people would write about it, and you would go, oh, dear Lord. And, Jack always wanted a kind of a theatrical ending, and I don't think it's a tragic ending, because I think Chauncey will go on. I don't think he's going to go home and commit suicide. But it is the end of an era. It's the end of that kind of comedy and his career in that world, and yet, and he wanted this notion of, because I read something where someone said they had seen there was like a rope, for the curtain or something, then they said it looked like a noose, and that Chauncey was probably going to kill himself at the end of it, and I thought, no, it's just, he's saying goodbye. He's saying goodbye to that world in burlesque, as he has said goodbye to his friends, as you often do in the theater. You say, you think you're going to keep in touch, and then you don't. You don't see people, you may not see them ever again. But he wanted there to be this, a light fixture that has obviously come loose and fallen, and, which takes him by surprise, and that the fixture is sort of moving back and forth. And he just wanted an image of, essentially, now you see him, now you don't. Yeah. Now you see him, now you don't. Now you see him, he's gone. That was what he was going for. But it is funny how people would, say to me, what the hell was that about? What the hell was that about? People, Americans don't like ambiguity. They want to know what happened, I don't know. He moved to Hollywood, changed his name to Franklin Pangborn, and everything worked out.
Well, I figured watching it that you would move on and be who you were. And Ned, this was like a big first relationship for Ned, and he would learn from this and move on and be good.
Yeah,
and be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and be just fine.
I do, look, in the very first scene, he says to him, you can do this, you can do that, or you can leave and never look at my ugly face again. So where this is headed. You'd have to be terribly naive to think there's going to be a terribly happy ending. And the fact is, it's a wonderful thing that happens. It's great for Ned. And look, I think Chauncey, look, I had to, when doing this play, maybe more so than for a lot of things I've done, I created a very elaborate backstory to sort of, to deal with sort of some of the conflicts in the character, to explain them for myself. And I think Chauncey realizes the age difference, I think he loves Ned. I think he hasn't been in love that way in a long time, and it surprises him. And yet he knows it can't last because he's young and he's going to go on and have other relationships. And I think he wants him to, even though it kills him to sort of, a lot of people would, one of the arguments, I would read many things about the play, and people had, as they always do, have issues with plays. They always do. Even with The Iceman Cometh, people have issues with that. It's too long. Why does he keep repeating that? Maybe he had a reason, but anyway, so people had issues with this play, the way he's trying to juggle too many things and I couldn't follow it. So, okay. But I always, I think, what's interesting, they would always say, why would someone like you give up someone like him? And I think that's swell, thanks very much. Hey, I've been around, and it's not, I think it's not only, sure, there's layers to it. There's, yes, his internalized homophobia, his self-loathing, does he really deserve it? But I think it even goes beyond that. I think he's as Doug said in some interview, what happens to a person when, from the time he was a kid, they told him, you're less than normal. You're not one of us. You can't be. There's something wrong with you because you're different, and that's not allowed here. And this is how he's grown up. So I think he doesn't know any other way. I think he likes to have sex. I think he likes to have sex a lot. I just think he likes anonymous sex. And he likes it preferably with straight men. Although, and I think that's, one would say it's not healthy. But, I would also say, you got to get out more because there's a lot of people who feel that way. A lot of people don't want to get married and don't believe in monogamy. I don't think he believes in monogamy. I think he just, he likes, he's addicted to the danger, to the unknown. As he says, I think he's also trying to drive him away, but he says, you bore me. I want something new, I want something fresh, and I want something dangerous, because that's what I like. And that's quite an admission. And you could say, oh, he's fucked up because of that, and I think he is. I don't think he's not fucked up, but I think he's allowed to feel how he wants to feel, and he's also just not able to have that kind of relationship. And it's sort of tragic, and yet I think he's sort of heroic at the same time. I don't know, he's complicated. It's hard to figure him out, which is why I liked playing him. It's fascinating. You've got to read this book, Gay New York. Because there was this sort of what they called the pansy craze in the 20s, where there were clubs in Harlem and in the Village and the gay performers, and it was all very liberal and free, and people, people go slumming and go see, what the gays were doing, and then they'd come out and sing songs like feminine man and masculine woman, who's the rooster, who's the hen, and, crazy ditties, and, everyone was fine with it.
Yeah.
Nobody, as Chauncey talks about, George Chauncey, the author, talks about in the book, there was no heterosexual, homosexual. There was, there were queers and fairies and trade, or as some people like to be called, temperamental. I like that very much. I'm not gay, I'm just temperamental. But, you know, it was a fascinating, very different world than today. And, you know, that's in the 30s, after the Depression, and, you know, there was, because of religion and revival in religion, and, you know, what are we going to do? And then there was, things started to turn and got really bad for gay people, and you know, and having to live sort of in the shadows, and it's fascinating, that whole lifestyle and world. I mean, so many older gentlemen would come up to me after this play with tears in their eyes and say, "My God, you know, this part of my life, I never thought I'd ever see anything like that on stage, that kind of showing how it had to be kept in secret, and the pain of all of that, and yet also it was sort of a special club. There was also something, you know, titillating about it as well, because it was, you know, it couldn't be done out in the open."
Was the first scene written from the very beginning? That it's so beautiful. The way the show opens, I think, is absolutely stunning. That cat and mouse chase.
Yes.
Game, right? Was that written in the first draft when you got it?
Yes, and the scene is pretty much as I first got it. Yeah, I know. It's sort of it's one of the best scenes ever. I love that scene. And but it was Jack. You know, we sort of tried to set up the world, and Jack did, and I, you know, and we would all sort of, you know, I remember saying, there should be a signal. Yeah. You know, if I don't like someone, I'll put my hat on the chair. And, you know, if I like someone, I'll take my hat off the chair. You know, and that was became the first laugh. You know, yeah, we all sort of, you know, had to do that kind of research about what went on, and, you know, because, yeah, the automat. Yeah. You know, I'm sure too young to remember the automat. I sort of remember the automat. I remember going to the automat as a kid. Anyway, it was, yes, that first scene was always sort of, it didn't really change much.
Yeah. And then there's this remarkable cast, wonderful, wonderful cast. And one of your cast members is here, right there in the second row. Tony Award winner, Katie Huffman, right here.
Oh, my God. Katie. Katie was so great.
Yeah.
And it was very, you know, we have a history together, so it was always very, that last scene was always very emotional, to say goodbye to her. It's such a great relationship, the communist stripper and the, and the conservative Republican homosexual. But, you know, you have to remember, it was a conservative Republican in 1937. It's very different than what it is now. But
what's it like working with your friends? I mean, Louis J. Stadlin, you're a lot of
yes.
friends in this show. What's
yes.
it like performing with, like, Katie?
Well, it's sort of like an old rep company, because you know each other so well, and,
yeah.
and you know you can count on these people. These are, you know, extremely talented pros who can do anything. So it was, you know, it was just trying to fulfill, you know, the demands of this show, which were interesting and challenging. Maybe the most challenging part was going from the performance stuff on stage to the more serious stuff. Because I would always say to my dresser of many years, Ken Brown, we'd be, you know, putting on a cowboy hat and a thing, and I'd go, why can't we just do the serious stuff? Now, skip this. It was interesting, the effect it had on you, too, because as the sketches go on, they get a little darker, and the jokes are more derogatory about gays. You know, in the cowboy sketch, he's talking about they killed the fairy. You know, and it's uncomfortable, which is good. I mean, that's a good thing. But that was challenging to go from one thing to the next. And you really, you know, you didn't, unlike, say, something like The Iceman Cometh, where you have an hour and 15 minutes before you come on. So you have plenty of time to prepare and to get where you sort of need to be. This was, it was like you're thrown into the one thing after another. You're literally ripping off clothes, putting on a hat and coat, and then coming in drunk. Or you didn't have a lot of time to think. And sometimes that was really good and exciting. And you didn't know what was going to happen. And no, there was an extraordinary ensemble, everybody, you know, and especially young Johnny Orsini.
Talk about him. How did you find him and working with him, I mean, right out of school?
He just came in an audition, and we saw a lot of people, and it was tricky, you know. There's, as he was described in the play, you know, I had a certain image, and then he just had that innocence, that he conveyed a kind of purity and innocence that you believed, and as I said to Jack, he's the only one of the people who came in here who I actually believed he loved me. He really seemed to love me.
Yeah.
Nobody else could do it. And God knows he was easy to love, you know, and a sweet guy, and very, a nice heterosexual lad, and, but he was very comfortable with the intimacy of it all, and he certainly had great access to his emotions, and he was, he's a very special young actor, and it was it was a great part, and but I was very, very obviously these scenes were very dependent on one another, and he was always there, always present, and surprising, and we were very lucky that we found him.
You know, right before you did the Nance, you had taken on the role of Hickey in Eugene O'Neill's The Iceman Cometh, and you said, yep. You had said that doing that was the best preparation for you with taking on the Nance. Why?
Well, it was sort of, it was just a life-changing experience. I reached a point in my life. I had finished doing The Addams Family, this musical, the Broadway. There's one person clapping. And it had been and The Addams Family was sort of was a disappointing experience. We had hopes for, and it didn't, as very often with shows or musicals in particular, it didn't quite come together the way we had hoped. Although it was a very talented group of collaborators, they didn't really collaborate very well. And it didn't really come together in the way we all had hoped. And yet the public, even though critically it was not well received, as Bette Midler likes to say, it was not well received in certain circles, like the Earth. The public still wanted to see it because they liked those characters and the name, the brand name of the Addams Family, and they liked the idea of me and B.B. Newworth in those parts, and we had a very lovely, talented company, and so no matter what they had said, people were coming to see it, and so we did it for a year. But afterwards, I felt, I was reaching a certain point in my life where I thought, I just need to change things. I need to shake things up. I could go on doing this kind of entertainment forever. People would be very happy if I did. Some people would rather I did. But I was just feeling I had more to offer as an actor, in that in some ways, Charles Isherwood wrote this a lovely piece about me at the time of The Addams Family, that referred to me as I was the last of the great entertainers. And, you know, I mean, talked about my work as an actor, but and as flattering as it all was, I thought, I really am an actor. I mean, that's what I've been. I've always been an actor. I'm glad you think I'm funny, especially in a comedy. That's a very good thing to have happen in a comedy. But, you know, that you wouldn't laugh if I'm acting. This is, I'm not. Anyway, I just felt I needed to sort of break free of whatever preconceived notions people had about me, and and certainly along the way, I've done the plays of Terrence McNally, the plays of John Robin Bates, Simon Gray. I've certainly done things that have more colors than just the comedy. But obviously, I became well known for the producers and for the Birdcage and things like that. People, and those, I'm very grateful for all of that kind of success. But for me, at this point in my life, it wasn't enough. I didn't feel I was challenging myself enough as an actor, and I needed to shake things up. And so I sort of thought, how can I change? Is it possible to even change people's perception of me as more than just an entertainer or a comedian? So I sort of set out to do what I could. And, I happened to read this interview with Brian Dennehy and Robert Falls, the director and head of the Goodman Theater in Chicago. And they had a long history of doing plays together, many O'Neill plays. But, A Death of a Salesman in particular was a huge success for them. And they were talking about what, in Variety, they were being interviewed about what they might do next. And they talked about revisiting The Iceman Cometh. They had done it in 1990 at the Goodman with Brian playing Hickey. And I was reading this, and I was like, and they was thinking, well, now Brian might play Larry Slade if they revisited the play. And I knew Brian. I've known Brian for over 30 years. We're friends. And I just thought, this is it. I mean, I love this play. I read this play as a kid, and I've always loved the play. And I thought, well, that would shake things up, wouldn't it? And I thought, isn't this interesting, though? What intrigued me about it, playing Hickey, I'll be honest with you. When Kevin Spacey walks in the door, you think, oh, he probably just killed his wife. But when I walk in the door, I really am what he's describing in the play, which is he's the life of the party. And I thought, this is interesting for the audience because that's how they feel about me. They feel the way about me, the way the guys in the bar feel. And then I'm going to pull the rug out from under everybody. And that's an interesting dynamic, and it will make the audience feel uncomfortable as the people on stage feel uncomfortable. And let's see where that takes us. But, it should be the last guy you would expect to have done what he has done in the play. So, I sent a long email to Bob Falls, who I didn't know very well. I had met him a couple of times socially, so I sent him this email. And he said, well, to be honest, we were just talking off the top of our heads. There is no production plan, but I think that's a great idea, and let's get together and talk about it. And it took some time to figure out scheduling, and then we got together and decided and did it in 2012. And it was, and this was something that I knew in advance when I would be doing it, and I for the first time worked with a coach, Larry Moss, this wonderful acting coach who is just a brilliant guy, and who. He's worked with a lot of, big movie stars, and so but I had actually two friends of mine had worked with him and had talked so highly of him. I thought, I really can't just do this on my own at home. I was, you know, my partner, I would just, it was boring him to death, saying, well, what do you think he was thinking when this, you know, I've got to be able to talk to someone about this, to talk this through. And so I began this process. It was about 10 months in advance, and so I learned, first of all, I just wanted to learn it, and it's an enormous part, especially the fourth act, which is he talks for 40 minutes. He tells his life story. And then I would start to work, I started to work with Larry, and that was exciting and also slightly uncomfortable. You know, it was like, oh, this is interesting to be in this position again. But he's so brilliant, and you know, he's also a part therapist, part acting coach and teacher. So he was very, very, very helpful to me, extraordinarily helpful. And then you know, and then I went to Chicago. We had 6 weeks to rehearse. It's crazy. It's a regional theater, the Goodman Theater, so it's 6 weeks. And then you do 9 performances, and the critics come to I knew I was putting myself in the firing line. 9 performances, and they come to review you. And that 9, for a play like Iceman Cometh, that's nothing. You're just getting your bearings. But, so I wanted to be as prepared as possible. And you know, I remember the first preview. The first preview, Brian, we thought he was having a stroke. He went to the hospital. The understudy went on for the first 2 performances, so that was terrifying. And God bless him, he was this great Chicago actor who, he knew every line. It was unbelievable, the greatest understudy story ever. Because he's got it's a huge part, Larry Slade, and he said, he looked like he was, you know, in a daze because we had never really worked together. But he said every single line, and we did the play. We got through 2 performances. But anyway, you know, I would stand backstage before the fourth act, before I went on, and I, you know, I would be thinking, you know, why didn't I do Harvey? What was I thinking? But that's what I wanted. I wanted to terrify myself again. I wanted to be scared again and not know whether I could do it. And, you know, and O'Neill, I've talked about this, but, you know, he tests you in a way that no other writer will test you. He's asking you to be as brave as he is in his writing. He's asking you to go to the darkest, most awful places in your soul, the places you didn't even know you had. And it's terrifying and thrilling because of his language, the use of language. You know, it's extraordinary stuff. It really is. And Iceman is, you know, unbelievable. So, you know, we open, and it's a huge success there. It's, you know, you can't. One of my favorite moments of the run was they put up a sign and said to people, "Don't even come in the door. There are no more tickets to the Iceman Cometh." It was the loveliest sign I've ever seen. You just couldn't get in. People coming from all over the world because it's so rarely done, and. You know, but one of the things that happened was I said to Brian one day, who was a huge supporter and a loving mentor and supporter of mine, you know, doing this part, you know, and I said, give me some notes, tell me something. And he said, I think you're doing great. He said, you, in approaching this, you had to map it out. You had to prepare for this journey. The way you did. And he said, now, throw it all away. He said, now just let the play happen to you. Just see where it goes. Don't worry about hitting, you've got to get to this point or that emotional point. Just see what happens. Let the play take you over. And so, which was the best note I could have gotten at that point. So the rest of the run was exhilarating and thrilling I didn't know what was going to happen. And you know, there were like 2 or 3 sort of real breakthroughs I felt that I had. And this company of actors I worked with there in Chicago and also at BAM when we remounted it so they're great actors and great people, and they were always rooting for me. And you know, you knew you had done well. We would come over, you know, they come over and we say that was a special one. That was you know, something special was happening, and so you know, after that experience, it changes you. And it certainly makes you hungry for more, but you're just not the same. And I was highly, you know, I said this at some awards ceremony. I would highly recommend O'Neill to actors especially if you want to shake things up. You know, it was the best thing that I could have done for myself, and I was fortunate enough to be able to make it happen. You know, the theater is, you know, I would never get a part like Hickey in a movie or a television show. But in the theater, I have a little bit of power. And I could call people and say, would you be interested in doing this? And sometimes they want to do it. And so it was great preparation for the Nance. Because first of all, after Iceman, everything seems easy. When we did it at BAM, and I went back to It's Only a Play on Broadway, it was like, this is ridiculous. This is the silliest damn thing. But, yeah, does that answer your question?
That did answer my question. I think I have you for a little longer. You know, you talked about mapping out, because I'm sure working on Chauncey, you had to map Chauncey out the same way and then throw it all away and just do it. You know, I read where you said the Nance is the first real romance that I ever have done on stage, and that it was a challenge dealing with the intimacy and physicality of a guy on stage. Tell me why and how you overcame it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I've had romance, you know, in the sense of, you know, in Guys and Dolls is obviously a romance with Nathan and Adelaide, but this was, you know, especially for someone of my age, it was different, and it was, and you know, and that was the thing about Johnny. He was so great about all of that, and you know, you're just very vulnerable. That's all. It's just being very vulnerable and intimate with someone who you don't really know, who you're just getting to know in a rehearsal situation, and it's always awkward if you have to. You know, we had to kiss, and you know, it was, but it was interesting. You know, it just was, well, it's funny, I mean, I didn't have anything like that, like a movie scene where people are making love or you know, and they always talk about how, you know, it's uncomfortable to, you know, to have to do that in front of a crew, and it's a lot more technical than people really think, and, you know, hopefully it all comes together, and I mean that in the nicest way, but you know, in this, it was, you know, it was just, it really had to do with Johnny Orsini just being, you know, it was very easy, and it was not, you know, I mean, we didn't have any heavy-duty stuff to do, but it was, you know, it's interesting to be that intimate with someone, and he was always there that way, and never, you know, it could be uncomfortable for someone, and he wasn't, and it was all very, you know. So it was really a tribute to him that.
Because there were so many beautiful moments when you watch the film or see it on stage, like when you pin him into the underwear, and you just touch him for a second, and you look up at him, and there's this beautiful, intimate moment of something you haven't experienced in a long time, probably, with someone, or that intimate. It's those little moments you see.
Well, how do you know? Mr. Ridge.
Mr. Ridge, okay.
How do you know?
But you notice those little moments of Chauncey.
Just last Thursday.
But you see all those little intimate moments of Chauncey. You're remembering maybe those moments as the character, and so those little moments of you like putting this relationship together. That's what I love about watching it on film.
Well, thank you. You know, that's the great thing about seeing it. You know, on film, there's this intimacy that, you know, I think in some ways it's even better on film. I mean, it's a theatrical experience, but there's an intimacy to it that I don't know whether you always got in the theater, because the camera is giving you that kind of focus, and you know, there's a lovely those quiet moments of isn't that the saddest thing when he says, "It's not what I should be having"? Isn't that that's the saddest line in the play? Yeah. You know, it's so tragic, but
those are the beautiful moments,
yeah.
which you do see in the theater, but when you watch it on film, you're like, oh my gosh, they're so delicate when the camera goes in on those certain moments. That's what I noticed tonight. If you could sum up the best part of the experience of working on the Nance, Nathan, what was it for you?
Well, just the whole group, all of us, Katie and everybody, we would all, Andrea Burns, every Saturday night she would write. It was just a great camaraderie with this particular cast, and every Saturday night she would come into the automat. This is before the show started. You know, the curtain was down, and she would sing. She would write an original song to one of the melodies for the show, which about whatever was going on in the world or in the play, and then she sang this thing about that it was Saturday night on Broadway, and they don't know how good this is going to be, and she would sing. She would to get us all revved up for Saturday night on Broadway, and it was I'll always remember that, and just that kind of camaraderie and with these actors, which is what made it so special, and the fact that I think people I was very touched when people would come back and say, I think they thought it would be one thing. They thought it was just going to be, a show about old-time burlesque, and it was just going to be mainly funny. And then how moved people were and didn't know where this was going to take them, and how upset they would be. And how it was sort of very sweet that how people would say, they'd come back and they would say to me or to Doug, or, why couldn't they have worked it out? Couldn't they have... why couldn't that have worked out? And, yeah, it's that, just that they were so touched by it, and so that's, that it was a wonderful experience that way, but it was about that kind of, the group effort.
Yeah, we have a lot of actors in the house tonight, so my final question for you is, what is the best bit of advice that you've been given, both personally and professionally, that you live by? They're all waiting.
Well, it's so hard to say, to actors, when young actors ask you for that information, you think there is, everyone always says is, if there's anything else you'd be happy doing, try that. Because it's such a hard business, and yet, if you really want to do it, you're going to do it, and then we wish you all the best and all the luck in the world. But it's, I don't, it's, look, I had no connections to anyone in the business, or I was just this kid in Jersey City who, would watch the Tony Awards as a kid and think, or be taken to a play and think, I think this is what I would like to do. I think I could do that. I don't know how, each person has to create their own path, and it's just about that cliche of following your heart, following your dream, because that's, people don't. I did a friend of mine, Lee Wilkoff, wrote this little movie with a friend called Lounge Act that I did with Gabriel Byrne and Franny Conroy and Boyd Gaines, and we played. We're older actors, and we're but it hasn't really happened. It didn't really take off for us the way we'd hoped. So it's about people of this age who, and they hang out in the, it doesn't really exist the way it used to. They hang out in the Equity Lounge. That's where they, and my particular character basically lives at the Equity Lounge. And, you know, and he just, and he's so angry, and you know, and Ann Roth did the clothes, and we did. I had a huge fat suit and a beard and like a Greek fisherman's hat and tinted aviator glasses and a fisherman's vest. You've seen this guy on the subway with a shopping bag and reading a soiled copy of some O'Neill play, I'm sure. and you know, and it's that. It's people whose dreams, you know, are beaten, and you know, and yet, you know, somehow they hang on because they can't let go, and I don't know. It's just, you know, I don't have any great advice other than, you know, be kind to people. You know, be a professional. That's what I would say. Be a professional. Show up on time. You know, do your homework, come in with ideas and exuberance, and give 150%, and be kind, and you know, and it is about the group effort. It is about working together, even whether you have the biggest part or the smallest part. It's about creating this experience and sharing it with, you know, 8 times a week with people, and loving what you do. You know, it was the old Jack Lemmon story. You know, he always used to tell this story, which was his father was a baker, and he, you know, when he had to tell him that he wanted to be an actor, he was nervous because he didn't think he would, you know, that especially in that time period, was not looked upon very highly to go into the acting profession. And he said to him, do you love it? Do you love it with all your heart and soul? And he said, yeah, Dad, I do. And he said, well, he said, then I understand. He said, the day I don't find romance in a loaf of bread, I'll walk away.
Well, I have wanted to do this for the longest time. You and I go back quite some time.
We do.
We do, right?
You're such a nice man.
Well, I thank you for doing this. Will you come back again?
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nathan Lane.